Hello and welcome to Polygonjs. So in just 15 minutes, you're going to learn how to create interactive 3D animations like this one, which you can add to any website. So you're going to learn how to import assets, like we imported that car. You're going to learn how to assign materials on textures, like we have on that road. You're going to learn how to create instances, which can be useful for things like forest. And you're going to learn how to set up animations, which can be triggered based on user events, such as when we click on that road, the light is moving around. And all this will not require you to write a single line of code. So let's get started. So here I'm going to start by getting rid of those nodes, and I'm going to create a file node. Then I'll be able to browse the asset that I have on my hard drive. So I've already pre-selected the car, which I'm going to load now. And once it showed up, then I'm going to go back up and I'm going to create a new object. And I'm going to try and make a road. So let's call it road. And now there is already a box in here, so I'm going to transform the box. So I'm going to make it longer and wider, and I'm going to put it down a little bit, just so it touches the wheels like this. And now I'm also going to make it actually thinner, in which case I probably need to put it back up. And now I'm going to add a material to it so it looks like a road. So I'm going to create a material node, but I still need to actually create the material I want to assign. So I'm going to create a material network, and I'm going to create a standard material. And now I need a texture that I want to have on it. So I'm going to create a cut network for compositing. And in here I'm going to create an image node. And again, I can browse my local file. So I'm going to select the road diffuse, which I've already downloaded and installed in my project. And when I immediately click, I can actually double check that this is the texture I want. So I'm going to call that image road. And I'm going to assign that to my material. So I'm going back to the texture tab to use map. And here I can select my texture. Now I'm going to assign the material to the actual road. And if I select my material, now I have my texture on the box I created. And we can see that the light is not ideal. So I'm actually change the light that I have, and I'm going to create a directional light. And I'm going to get rid of those two. And now I want to actually move it. So first thing is I can show the helper. I can see where the light is. So I can move it around and I can rotate it. But that's not the most straightforward way of moving a light, so I'm going to use instead a polar transform, and that will allow me to move a light with longitude and latitude. So I'm going to parent the light to it, and I'm going to remove those values, and I'm going to rotate the light 90 degrees so it faces the z-axis. And now I can move it a little more easily, like this. And now the first thing I notice is that there is no shadow under my car. So I'm going back here and I'm going to add an object properties. And I want to make sure that cast shadow is toggled on and to apply to children. So the whole hierarchy is actually inheriting that. And then the shadow is too small. So I want to go to my light and I want to make sure I increase the shadow size like this. And I can probably hide the helper. Now let's try and add some trees. So I'm going to create a new object, calling it trees. And let's start by creating one tree. So I'm going to get rid of that node box. And I'm going to create a tube. And I'm going to create a cone. And I'm going to merge both of them. Like this. And I'm actually going to hide everything else for the time being. So I'm going to make the radius of the tube much smaller, and I'm going to have the cone look in the other direction. And I'm going to change its center and change its radius as well, and increase the height. So it sort of looks like a tree. And I'm going to have it stand up like this, and I'm going to raise it as well. Now let's have many of those trees. So I'm going to create a plane, and I'm going to increase the size of the plane, and I'm going to use an instance node to have those trees on the plane. Now we can see that it doesn't look like what we expected. So the first problem is that in here we have two objects, and only the first one is going to be used by the instance node. So we need to make sure that the merge node is not set to separate object, but it's actually set to compact, so that we only have one object, that both input geometries are merged into a single geometry. Now the tree is not facing the right direction, so we're going to remove this, and I'm going to actually rotate it 90 degrees like this, 180 degrees like this instead of 90. And now it's a matter of moving it to the z-axis to have it stand where we want it. And here we can now increase the size of our plane. It's all very cheap in the browser. They're all instances. Now let's try and place this correctly. So I'm going to display again this the road, and I'm going to move the plane so that they are not on the road, like this. And I can actually make the plane bigger like this. And let's add some variation to it. Let's add a jitter node to break the regularity of it, and I just want to make sure that the planes don't move on the y-axis. So here you go, and I probably can move this a little bit more like that. And we can also add some variation in size of the trees. So I'm going to use an attribute create, plug it in here, and I'm using the p-scale attribute. And here you can see that as I move the value, it will update the height and the size of the trees. So here I can use an expression. So let's say I'm going to say 0.5 plus random btnum. So for every tree, we're going to have a value between 0.5 and 1.5. And now we have a variation of their height. And now let's have the car actually drive forward. So what we can do is we can use a trick for the texture of the road. For instance, let's start by that, where we can animate the transform of the texture itself by using the offset. And so the first thing we may notice when we do that is that the texture here is all stretched, and it's because it doesn't repeat beyond the bounds 0 and 1 of the UVs. So we need to make sure that we have the wrap here set to repeat wrapping, and now the texture will repeat just fine. So now we can go back to the offset, and let's have this animated. So again, we can use an expression, we can use the time. So as we move forward, as we play, this will actually animate. But let's multiply that by 0.1, and let's say 0.2 minus 0.2 to have it not go too fast. And we can probably increase that to 0.4. So now we have the road which looks like it's moving. And let's apply the same thing to the trees. So if we go back to the actual trees, to the instance node, we can see that it actually created a material, which is what allows the instances for being at their different positions. And if we just go to the material, which is here, and here we can see that this node has been added to the shader, and this contains instant position, orientation, and scale, and we can find a way to have the instant position be animated. So let's use an attribute create. With the preset, I can select instance position. So if I plug it like this, nothing happens because this is the same value that was already here by default. But now let's use the time to actually affect the position. So if we use vector 3 to float and float to vector 3, now we only want to animate in the x-axis. So we're going to leave the y and z axis like that. But this, we're going to find a way to add this value and the time together. So if we were to do that right away, and we put this to the instance position, we have the trees simply fading in the distance. So let's tweak the speed. So we're going to add to the time. And let's say we want to have that a bit faster. Even faster. That's probably a good speed. And now the problem is that the trees are going to keep going in the distance. They will not come back. What we would like is to, when the tree arrives more or less there, that tree would come back right here. So we need to tweak the result of that addition. So what we can do is use a modular node. And we're going to modulate, let's say, when that arrives at 10. So now what we have is the trees keep going back. But it's not the right range. I want them to go a bit faster, so let's tweak maybe 40. And now we see they are going quite far. But they are coming back. And now we want them to come back not just here, but further back on the left. So I'm going to have another mult add. And I'm going to offset the result of that modulo right here. And maybe 40 is a bit too much, so let's go with 20. And here you go, we have the trees coming back. So now let's add an animation to it. Let's see if we can animate the light. So I'm going to actually redisplay the light here. Let's see if we can animate the light from that position to that position. So we're going to go from 100 to 250 in the longitude. So let's create an animation network. And we're going to create a target, which is going to be the node that is going to be animated. So I'm selecting node. I'm selecting the node, which is the polar transform. And I want to animate the property called longitude. So I select property name, and I want to select the value of that property. So here I still have longitude, so I can go to the parameter, copy param, pass name, and I want to have to go from 100 to 250. And I will want to go back and forth between those two values. So I'm going to add one node, two null nodes, and those null nodes give me a button to play and pause the animation. So the first one is going to call play, and the second one is going to call reset. So now if I click play, we move here. If I click reset, we move back. And I don't like the timing of the animation, so I want to add some easing. And I'm going to select power 3 in out, and already it starts a bit nicer. It's not a linear animation, but it's a little too fast, so I'm going to add a duration to it, and I'm going to set it to 3. And here you go. It's a bit nicer. So now let's have this animation react to something we do in the scene, not just when we click on those buttons. So for that, let's create an events network. And in order to detect what's under the cursor, we need a raycast node. So here we're going to detect which node we click onto. So we're going to select the road. So let's say when we click on the road, the light goes to the right. When we click away from the road, the light goes back to the left. So we need to have that raycast node being triggered. So we're going to tell it when there is a pointer event, something will happen. So let's use for now the pointer move. So we're going to plug that here and here. And we're going to, first thing is we're going to do, we're going to give a hint to the user that something can happen. So we want to change the cursor when there is nothing to click on and when there is something we can click on. So we're going to say when the hit is detected, we're going to change the CSS class on the viewer. And when there is nothing, we're going to remove that class. And now when we move on that, we should see this. But we are not seeing it yet because we need to toggle traverse children. And now we have it here. And now still nothing happens. We only modify the cursor. But so let's duplicate those nodes. And now I want to use the pointer down. I still want to use the move to update the mouse position. but I'm going to use the pointer down to actually trigger the event, which are going to be hit and miss. And now I want to start the animation if I have a hit, and start another animation if I have a miss. And now we're going to select the animation, so I select the play node, and here I'm going to select the result node. So when I click, we go back, and if I click away, we go back here. So that's really it. So you've seen how to create animations, create events, create geometries, add textures, add materials to the node. And with those simple bricks, you should be able to create your own 3D experiences right from the browser. All you need to do once you have that, create file export, and then you will have what you can upload on the website. Thank you.